Welcome to The Explainer. I've got to say, this past weekend brought some absolutely unprecedented shocks to both our domestic and international systems. It is truly a fragile moment for global stability, and we have a ton of rapidly shifting information to unpack today. So let's jump right in.
Here's a quick look at our agenda for what's been a remarkably volatile week. We're going to break down the passing of Lindsey Graham, a sudden escalation with Iran, some major electoral chaos unfolding in Maine, and a turning point in Ukraine.
Starting right off with our first major development, the sudden and shocking passing of South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham.
Senator Graham passed away incredibly unexpectedly from cardiac arrest at the age of 71, and the timing here is just stunning. This happened mere hours after he had returned to the U.S. from a diplomatic trip to Kyiv, where he was meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky. This sudden illness obviously sent immediate shockwaves across Washington and well beyond.
When you look back, this really caps off a robust legacy that is deeply embedded in the fabric of American politics. He was elected to the House back in 1994, where he famously served as an impeachment manager. He then moved to the Senate in 2002, launched a presidential run in 2015, and eventually became the incredibly powerful Judiciary Chair in 2019, where he played a huge role in shaping the Supreme Court. He was literally a fixture in Washington for decades.
You can really see his deep personal impact on the people he worked alongside. Fellow South Carolina Republican Senator Tim Scott put it this way: "America lost a statesman, but I lost a friend. One of the most powerful forces for good. Keeping Americans safe is his legacy." Senator Scott made a point to highlight how Graham went totally out of his way to welcome him and make him feel seen as South Carolina's first black senator, basically embracing him as family.
But his reach went way across the aisle too. Just listen to this incredibly candid reflection from Democratic Senator Chris Coons. He said, "No better friend, no tougher adversary. I love him like a brother, which means when I fight with him, I want to kill him." What's so wild about this is that Coons and Graham had just celebrated Graham's 71st birthday together over dinner in Turkey just a few days before his passing. It's a real reminder of how personal relationships behind the scenes often transcend those bitter political divides we always hear about.
The crucial point here is that right up to his literally final day, Graham was orchestrating major foreign policy. He was on the ground in Ukraine on Friday, and he was actively working with Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal on a very strict, hawkish Russian sanctions bill. In fact, he had just successfully convinced Donald Trump to support this new legislation before he died. His influence was moving at full speed until the very end.
All right, Section 2, Escalation with Iran. We need to make a hard pivot to the Middle East right now, where a very delicate truce has violently shattered.
The immediate question on everyone's mind is urgent. Is the ceasefire with Iran officially over? We really have to ask this right now, especially after the complete, sudden breakdown of diplomatic talks that were just taking place in Oman over the weekend. Because, guys, the sequence of events over the last 24 hours has been dizzying. Iran is now claiming that the vital Strait of Hormuz is closed. On top of that, Iranian forces actually fired on a commercial ship, and in direct response, the U.S. launched a third round of bombing inside Iranian territory. These escalations happened practically overnight, and they are severely threatening global shipping and overall international stability. What's really striking here is the immediate, stark shift in tone from President Trump. While over at the NATO summit, he essentially pronounced the ceasefire dead, saying point blank, "As far as I'm concerned, it's over. They're scum. If they had a nuclear weapon, they'd use it." This is a massive pivot from recent diplomatic efforts, and it definitely signals a return to a highly combative posture from the U.S.
Looking objectively at the international response, UN Ambassador Mike Waltz pointed out that 143 nations have firmly condemned Iran violations of international law. Now, interestingly enough, Iran privately tried to claim that the ship attack was just a mistake by junior officers, which is a claim the U.S. is absolutely not buying. Ambassador Waltz also confirmed that active Iranian assassination plots still exist against President Trump and his cabinet. Yet, in a truly surprising twist amidst all this chaos, technical nuclear file talks are reportedly still ongoing behind closed doors. Wild, right?
Moving to our third topic, electoral chaos in Maine. Let's transition back domestically to a critical Senate race that has just been thrown into absolute disarray.
So, progressive challenger Graham Plattner has officially dropped out of the Maine Senate race following some very serious sexual assault allegations. Plattner was an insurgent Democratic candidate, heavily backed by figures like Senator Bernie Sanders, and he was running against the longtime incumbent Republican, Susan Collins. Well, after an ex-girlfriend came forward with these allegations, his campaign instantly collapsed, leaving a massive void on the ticket.
And wow, this creates an absolute logistical nightmare for Maine Democrats. Think about this timeline. Plattner exits the race on July 12th. Now Democrats have to throw together a 600-person emergency convention on July 25th, simply because they are up against a strict immovable 5 p.m. deadline on July 27th to submit a brand new name to the Secretary of State. They literally have a razor-thin 2-week window to restart a statewide Senate campaign from scratch.
So who steps up? A whole list of potential candidates are scrambling to fill that vacancy. We're looking at Troy Jackson, a former state Senate president and logger who could capture the working class vote. There's Sheena Bellows, the current Maine Secretary of State. Dan Clivenbaugh, founder of the Maine Beer Company. And Dr. Nirav Shah, former state CDC director. Keep in mind, this is a must-win seat for Democrats in a state Donald Trump previously lost. But Susan Collins is a highly formidable, battle-tested survivor. So whoever gets picked from this list is facing a seriously steep uphill battle.
Finally, our fourth story today, a major turning point in Ukraine. We are returning to the front lines in Europe for a surprise momentum shift.
We are seeing a really dramatic shift on the ground. It wasn't that long ago that the outlook for Ukraine felt incredibly dire. They were highly vulnerable to Russian ballistic missiles and constantly struggling for basic resources. But the current reality, at least according to Representative Michael McCaul, who just reported directly from Warsaw, is totally different. He says Ukraine is actually winning the drone war. Troop morale is incredibly high, and they are rapidly innovating right there on the battlefield.
So what's driving this? It essentially boils down to 3 specific factors. First, that Ukrainian drone innovation is actively destroying billions of dollars in Russian tech. Second, President Trump has agreed to license the production of Patriot interceptors directly in Ukraine. And third, that massive Russian sanctions bill, which, as we discussed, is Lindsey Graham's final legacy project, is officially on the horizon. Now, to be fair, actually manufacturing those newly licensed Patriot interceptors is going to take a good 1 to 2 years to fully realize, but the policy shift itself, that's a huge psychological boost.
All of this creates a fascinating diplomatic stalemate. Representative McCaul noted, Zelensky told me just yesterday he's ready for a ceasefire. The only man stopping this peace process is Mr. Putin. This really shows that Ukraine is feeling strong enough on the battlefield to negotiate from a place of power. But they still require maximum economic and military pressure, like those incoming interceptors and impending sanctions, to actually force Putin to the negotiating table.
Which brings us to the end of our briefing and leaves us with one massive question to chew on. How will all these concurrent power vacuums and military escalations impact the rapidly approaching November elections? We've just looked at a single weekend defined by sudden deaths, shattered ceasefires, and electoral chaos. I want you to think about how this might completely rewrite the global and domestic landscape just months before voters head to the polls. Thank you for joining this explainer today. Keep all this vital context in mind as your week unfolds, and I'll see you next time.